Today, we're going to be covering maps, an introduction to maps and all the different map templates that we offer at Flourish. The idea of this session is to give you an overview of the different map templates. I am going to go into the details of some maps, some settings, but I'm not going to dive into one template specifically. We will have kind of follow-up sessions further down the line for each of the different map templates. For example, next week we will be covering the projection map in depth. So this session is really about giving you an overview about all the different options you have in Flourish for displaying maps. As usual, I have the rest of my team, our team, the team with me in the chat window. Feel free to ask them any questions and they will reply with helpful information and links to help docs, or you can also reach us at prioritysupport@flourish.studio after the session if you have any questions or suggestions or feedback. Okay, so today is about maps, and in Flourish we have kind of two types of maps, and it depends on what kind of data you're trying to show. One of the types of maps that we have, which we have several templates for, is for displaying regions, which in our case is displaying GeoJSON regions. That is a file format for displaying geometries, shapes next to each other. And we have a few different templates for that. And what you will need for those types of maps is a GeoJSON file, GeoJSON as in this word here. And I will just show you what that looks like in our projection map template, because that is one of the templates that takes data in GeoJSON format. So I'll show you what that looks like in the app. So I'm just going to head over to our templates page. That is the page that you arrive at when you click new visualization. And then you can already see it here. We have all these different starting points. And if I just select one of these now, you can see these are all these different shapes. So these are what we call polygons, and they are part of the GeoJSON, which you can see when you switch over to the data tab. The first column here always contains that geometry or those polygons or multi-polygons. So this is kind of what the GeoJSON is. You can also add your own to Flourish, and then they will display in this map template if the template supports GeoJSON. If you double click into these polygons, which you don't need to do, but this is more just nice to know, you can actually see that these shapes are built up out of all these coordinates. So what it's doing is kind of telling Flourish to draw around these coordinates. You can also delete certain lines of geometry from your GeoJSON, and you might have already just seen what happened there. I just deleted the Central African Republic. That might be useful. That was not a great use case, but that might be useful if you kind of have a blueprint. So a blueprint is what we call the various starting points that we offer here. And then you might want to delete one or two countries or counties out of it and arrive at just one certain country or area. But you can also add your own GeoJSON. And I'm just going to show you how you could do that. I'm just going to grab one that I found here yesterday. You can find GeoJSON files all over the internet. There are various that do not need attribution. Some of them do. This one I wasn't sure, so I just added attribution to be sure. But yeah, you can normally kind of Google country or area that you're looking for, GeoJSON, and then you will find a file that you should be able to input to Flourish. You can see that just downloaded there, and I'm just going to head back over to the editor. And this time, instead of selecting one of these starting points here, I'm going to select the blank option. This is if you don't want to use any of these starting points because maybe the country that you want to show is not available. And then it actually just appears completely blank. But then if I switch over to the data tab, I can actually just pull in my GeoJSON now. I can select overwrite current sheet, and then that will import. The data that I'm showing here, or the regions, you can also see kind of each of the polygons there. These are national parks in the UK. And now I can already see them displaying on my map. And currently the value is told to be in column C. So I'm just going to check what that is. It's some kind of an ID. I would switch that probably to column D, which contains the name. Now you can see the legend will reflect on that, but you could also select to turn off that legend, as in this case, maybe not so useful. That would be here. But yeah, now I can see these regions. You can kind of make out that it's the UK, but not really. So in this case, you might not actually want to add just that GeoJSON, but you might want to merge it first with the rest of the UK, or add it to an existing map of the UK, which you can also do by, and I already created an example of that here. I'm not going to go into the whole process here because we have a lot of different maps to cover in this session, but I will just show you quickly what it looks like and how, and I will describe how I arrived at that. So that's this one. I'm just going to change the size so we can see it a bit better. And now, oh dear, that's not the right one. One sec. UK parks. What I did is I took an existing blueprint, so one of the starting points that we offered, and I added those rows that I had just imported to the bottom of that, and then they appear kind of on top of the existing regions. So that's one way that you can kind of add your regions on top of an existing blueprint or starting point, as we call them. But you can also do that separately in a different tool called Map Shaper, which again, I'm not going to go into detail about, but we have a lot of help docs on the topic of how to use Map Shaper to help you get your GeoJSON file in the right format, and also on the topic of merging regions or splitting out regions and so on. So there's lots of resources there that you can go to if you have any questions around kind of GeoJSON specifically. Yeah. So going back to my first slide here, I'm just going to cover what else is involved in the projection map template when you're trying to display regions. So we have, I'm just going to go back to the template overview page. We have different, I'm just going to take the Europe blueprint this time. You'll see same story. Each country in this case has its own row, and that was supplied in the GeoJSON that we pulled into Flourish and just saved as a blueprint. And now you have different options for coloring your maps. This one is coloring by value, which we've supplied here in column C, which is the population. So that's a number, so it makes sense to color it by the number. You can set if you want it to be colored by a number in the regions layer settings. So that would be numeric, or if you want to color it by category, so categorical, I'll just switch it to that so you can see what happens. You'll now see that each of the numbers is treated as a category. So maybe if I were to want to use categorical coloring, it would make more sense to actually use a category. So maybe in this case, the countries. So those are the two different options for coloring. It's also possible to supply multiple columns for coloring. I'm just going to go back to my examples that I prepared. And one of them we have here, a map of COVID cases, which I'm going to go into detail in just a moment. And you can actually select maybe total cases and total cases per million. I'm not saying this is a good idea. I'm going to talk about that in a bit, but just to show the functionality, you can actually select multiple columns by just separating them with a column or a comma or a dash, and then you'll get this control, so you can actually change the columns. And then in this case, I accidentally seem to have selected the date as well. I don't want that. In this case, now the coloring is quite light in this version, and that's because you are basing the coloring on all columns. So it's taking the maximum and the minimum of the largest of all values that are being taken into account here. So you might want to change that to current column so that you get a bit more distinctive coloring within each of those options. So yeah, this is not a good example at all of what you should do data wise or visualization wise, but I just wanted to show that functionality. Great, so that's that. When importing maps or other data to your map, we have a handy functionality called upload and merge. I'm going to show you that now. If I have actually that COVID data that I was just showing, if I wanted to add that to a map now, and I have data that contains the country name or the 3-letter code, but I don't have this GeoJSON, then you can actually use our GeoJSON and upload and merge in your data. And the way that you do that is that you just go on this little drop down here, you select upload data and merge instead of upload and overwrite. And then I've already prepared it here. I have a data set that contains 3-letter codes. And then I'm going to try and match with this existing map in Flourish, which already has the GeoJSON and 3-letter codes. So now if I select import, it asks me which column would you like to merge on? And I know this now since I've already tried it this morning, that it's this ISO A3, and then I just match it with my ISO code in my data set. And then once I select merge now, it's going to attempt to match them up. In our case, 59 rows were ignored because they don't match. That's probably because my data set doesn't have those 59 rows or the other way around. You can relatively easily identify which ones are missing by just finding the blanks and either filling those in or fixing the name in your data set to make sure that it's the same as the one in the visualization, and then uploading and merging again. So in the case of France, for example, it seems to not have worked because the 3-letter code doesn't seem to be correct. So I would probably update that and merge again because now it's empty. But most of the countries seem to have imported, and then I would just select my total cases or total cases per million. I'm going to go with total cases per million. And then you can see it is now coloring my map based on that value. So that's how you would import data. If you wanted to keep our regions, but import your own data, then you would match on country names. So that's that. Moving on. I have already touched on this topic. I also wanted to give you a resource for, so I only was aware of this one for UK level data at this point. I'm going to look into the US one as well, but the ONS has lots of GeoJSON files available for UK level data. So everything from constituencies to local authorities to NUTS level 1, which is kind of just the country level. As we don't have all of these things in Flourish already, but you can also feel free to reach out and ask us if we might already have this or that region. I'm trying to maintain a folder full of kind of GeoJSONs that we don't yet have as blueprints, but we do have available and are happy to share it with you. So feel free to reach out there. Great, so that was a quick introduction to GeoJSON regions in the projection map. But as this session is meant as an overview for all map templates in Flourish, I'm going to move on to the 3D map now, as this template also takes GeoJSON regions. The way that this works is that you can actually copy the same regions and just paste them into a 3D map. Or I'm just going to go to the template page again and show you which template I mean. First of all, I'm going to go to new visualization, scroll down, and then we have it here. We have all these different starting points again for animated points, regions and points, extruded regions, and so on. I'm just going to select one without regions at this point and show you how you would add your own regions. Here again, I would go over to the data tab, and now we have a regions tab. That is where you want to add your regions. And I'm just going to drag in my UK park data again. I'm going to say overwrite current sheet. And now those have imported. I would double check that my column bindings are correct here. And then those should display. So let's just zoom in and see if they're there. Yes, they are. So now you can see maybe why this would be a better choice if this is what your GeoJSON looks like. If it's just kind of one region and you want to put it into context, then our 3D map allows you to select from different background maps with lots of different styles available. So here's, for example, Flourish Light, and it will also pull through any theme styles that you have for fonts and colors. And then you can also customize layers. And for example, if you don't want labels, you could kind of turn them off. And you can also customize your palette by selecting custom palette from the map styles. And then I could actually really make this look just in my branding guidelines with all the colors there. You can enter hex codes here as well. So that's why this is a good choice if you kind of maybe have a GeoJSON region of a certain city and you want to show it within the context of a larger map. Or for this park data, I think it's a really good use case. Okay. So another thing that this map supports, the 3D map, is extrusion. That's kind of one of the things that makes it different to the projection map. And to turn on that extrusion, you would go into the regions tab. And first you need to have a value, a height column binding, I mean. So in this case, I might select F as my height. Value, I believe, is being used for coloring if it's a number. Category would be used for coloring if it's a category, and height is used for extrusion. So once I've made my height column binding, I'm just going to go zoom back in. Then I can hit this extrude regions toggle here. It's a bit annoying that it always zooms back out. I will add an issue on that. But now you can see my regions are being extruded based on the square kilometers in this example. And then you can change the maximum height. It might be a bit too extruded. That's like not enough. So you can play with it there with the different options. So that's one of the kind of magical things that our 3D map template can do that our projection map template cannot do with regions, with GeoJSON regions. So that is another reason that you might want to use this template. It does also support just a normal projection mode. So that would be if you had regions of a country and you wanted to show them in a projection, so not on a base map, it would work in exactly the same way. I'm just going to remove these points as I don't need the points in my example. So I just cleared that sheet. Yeah, again, I don't really have the context here, but you can imagine that this would work well or better if you had all the regions of a map. But I am going to move on now. So this map template also uses WebGL technology, which is worth mentioning because it means that you can add lots more points and also more detailed, heavy data on the GeoJSON side, as it's just a lot more performant. I've also linked a blog post where you can go through lots of nice examples that we created upon the addition of regions. Here's an example of a projection, for example, where we're not showing it on a base map, but as a projection. And then you can also show it on a base map though. So yeah, feel free to click through that in your own time. Okay, before I move on to some other map types that we have for points, I'm going to stick with the regions for one moment longer to touch upon kind of some things where you have to be careful. And one of them is that when you are using a Choropleth, so a map where you are shading by a value or a quantitative measure, you have to make sure that this should only be used when the quantitative measure is directly associated with and continuously relevant across the spatial region. So maybe if you're shading the entire US here, but it's actually only relevant to a few hotspots, then this would not be the best way to visualize that. And similarly, if the quantitative measure and you're using absolute values is only a consequence of more people living in a certain area, then that's also distorting the data. So in this example, this is how you should not do it. This is using absolute values for shading a map. And we can see, this is the same example I was just playing with before. We can see the US is quite dark, and India and Brazil. And yes, they have a lot of COVID cases, but that is also because they have a large population. So we would recommend always calculating something like per million or per acre or something similar to that, and using that value. But still, it could be problematic based due to the thing that I mentioned first, which is that it doesn't always refer to the whole region. So this is already a lot better than showing the absolute values. Now we're showing it per million. I would, of course, also update that in the header down here. And then, yeah. But we're going to move on now to some even better examples where you could use points. Oh, and one last point, which is this one down here, which is that the best representation of your data is not always a map. So even though you might have countries in your data set, that doesn't mean that you have to show it on a map, because sometimes it might just be much clearer in a chart. For example, here, I'm not really able to see the small countries in Europe, even though maybe one of them has really high numbers in comparison to another country. Or also if you're just showing a region, which is North America and contains the US and Canada, it's kind of, everyone knows that where the US and Canada are. So if it's not adding more than kind of showing something on a map, then maybe you should use a different type of chart. In this case, maybe a bar chart to show the cases or something like that. But moving on to points. So until now, we've been covering all the different GeoJSON maps, which are a projection map and the 3D map, but we also have other map templates which support point structured data. And if your data is in points, it will come with latitudes and longitudes. So here we're looking at the same data, or actually it's depths, so it's not exactly the same, but a similar data set from the same source. And we are showing it as points. So if I go to my data tab here, this is back in the projection map, by the way, then I can see that there are two tabs here, the regions, which is how I'm showing the region, but I'm actually not shading it by anything. I don't have a value column binding here, and the points tab, which is here. And we have defined a latitude and a longitude for each country. And then if you scroll down in the columns panel here, you will find the area which is relevant to the points. So you always have a latitude and a longitude. So where regions always have a GeoJSON with all these coordinates and shapes, points always have a latitude and a longitude. So they are normally a bit easier to get your hands on, I would say, as well, as you can easily geocode them or find them on pages such as latlong.net, or also lots of data sets already kind of include geocoded latlongs when you download them. We've also listed a resource here for batch geocoding specifically for UK postcodes. Is that something that comes up from time to time, where you can actually just enter a bunch of postcodes and then it will spit them out as lat longs. And then you can use those for points. This map type can actually take totals, so you wouldn't have to calculate through a million first, as the input data is used to draw a symbol on top, and you can actually compare those much easier than if you were just using shading of the entire region, and they're proportional to the data. So this would be a better choice of map if you're showing COVID data. So that's one of the map types that takes points, so lat long structured data. But our 3D map, going back to it, also takes points. I'm just going to go to this example here to show you what I mean. This data set is showing earthquakes over time. So if I go back to the data tab, we can now see that our regions tab is empty, but our points tab is displaying latitudes and longitudes. And we also have a time in this case. If I scroll down to the points area here, I can actually remove that time binding, and then I just receive all the points kind of at once. So this would be a different template which you can use to achieve similar results as to the one that we saw here. But again, it's just, it can deal with a lot more points. So it performs better with larger data sets. It can take tens of thousands of points, whereas the projection map might struggle with that amount of points. So here really all you need is a latitude and a longitude. But again, this template just does a bit more than the projection map. So this one is one to go to if you have a time dimension, because then you can show it on a timeline. So in this case, we have the date, but it could also be throughout one day. And then you can configure the different settings for that within the timeline settings here. You can set the date format so that it is recognized and accepted, and you can also control all kinds of things around the speed and whether it should be able to aggregate and so on. We will be covering the 3D map in depth in its own session, so I'm going to leave it at that for now. It's also possible to combine the points and the regions layers. So for example, if I go back to my UK regions example here, I could actually copy these regions. And this is also something you can do across templates. So if you're in the projection map and you have some regions and then you move to the 3D map, you can just copy all of that data, and I'm going to go to the regions tab here and paste that in. And then you will be able to see that now on top of my animated points, I should also have some UK regions. Maybe I haven't made the correct column bindings. Ah, yes, there they come. They currently do not have the right, there we go. Column binding, it was pointing to an empty column. So now when I switch back to preview, now you can see I have my animated points, I have my regions, I could even extrude those regions. I have my base map, I could also show it with a projection. So that's that. I just noticed that I am running a bit late, so I'm going to race through the rest here. Sorry about that. There's even an option to move, have animated points, so points that move through time. That is possible through a column binding called animation group, I believe. Here's an example of that, where we have the Chicago subway system or train system, kind of the different lines driving through Chicago, and each point is kind of stopping at the various points. And this is also a nice example of a Flourish story, a Flourish animated map story, which I also have created a help doc on here, which will walk you through how you could create something like this with these lovely pan and zoom effects, where you can zoom into a part of the world or the US and really drill down into that data, which works really nicely with our 3D maps, especially because you have those nice zoom pan effects. So the way that you would do that, just real quick, is to take a 3D map that can be our 3D map here, but we also have other maps that support this kind of thing. So the marker map and the arc map. Add it to a story, which you do here in the top right corner on create a story. And then what you do is you just duplicate that slide a few times. And this only works in in the 3D maps. It does not only work in the 3D maps, but also in other maps, but in these it just works the smoothest because they have this 3D effect. And then you can zoom and pan to different places around the world. And you can also slow down that animation to make it all a bit smoother. But again, I'm unfortunately running out of time. So here's a quick example of that, very rough, but you can really achieve something quite magical quite quickly by just adding a single visualization to a story, duplicating it, and then focusing on different points. Okay, then, just to sum things up, I'm a bit sad that I'm neglecting these other great templates down here, but I just don't have the time to go into them much further, unfortunately. But yeah, the marker map is a map that supports markers. Those can be icons, emojis, or even images. So you can actually go in there, find the emoji column, and then you could replace that with an image. So I'm just going to quickly show that there. And now you can already see it appearing in the bottom right corner. This is the Flourish logo, but you can use your own logo or any other image, someone's face, for example. So that's a very fun one and also really quick because all you need is lat longs, so points. Then the arc map shows connections between a source and a target, again in lat long format. So if I look at the example that I have put together here and switch to the data tab, I have a source and a target ID. And then in the locations tab, I am giving each of those IDs a latitude and a longitude. So it works in a very similar way, except that here you kind of have this lookup tab for the latitudes and longitudes. And finally, before I end, a few minutes over time, our connections globe template, which is similar to our ArcMap template in the sense that it's a source and a target, and it shows flows, but it's displaying them on a globe. So here again, I have source and destination, and then I have my lookup table of the name and the latitude and longitude. But what's different in this one is that I also have all these filtering options. So I have the option to have a drop down. So that would be menu slider 1 and also a time slider. So you can actually run through time. And this also has more data handling options. So you can do things like if multiple rows with the same locations, then I want to sum the values or use the maximum or the minimum or calculate the mean and so on. So just a bit more customizable there on the data side of things, and appears as a globe. So where you could maybe show, as this example here is showing in a city, the arcs, the flows, that wouldn't work as well on the connections globe because this one's specific to the world, but it has a bit of a unique look. So that is the overview that I've put together of the different map templates. I am sorry for bombarding you a bit there with all those different maps. I hope it was helpful. Feel free to get in touch with any questions at prioritysupport@flourish.studio. And if everything was a bit too much today, then I'm happy to say that next week's session will be a bit more in detail about one map template, and that is the projection map. So we will be covering the projection map in a bit more depth next week, and we look forward to seeing you then. Have a lovely week.